we're going to be working with that basic interior drawing that we've been practicing. So I'm going to do a 1-point interior. On the second video I'll do a 2-point, but I'm going to do a basic 1-point interior. So I'm going to use normally you would use a 2H or an HB. I'm going to use a darker lead because I want this to be visible. So again, you would be using a 2H or an HB lightly. So the first thing you always start with, and I'm going to use a ruler because I think that's going to, for most of you, it's going to give you a better result than trying to freehand this. So I put again I put it pretty lightly, but you can still see it, horizon line. On an interior, a horizon line is comparable to eye level. So I'll just write that here. You don't necessarily have to write that on your sketch. So we're working with eye level. I'm going to put a single vanishing point. I put it up just a little off center of the middle. I'm going to choose a room. Remember, you can work with surrealism. You can work with your own space, a room, your bedroom, a room in your house, or you could create a dream interior. I'm going to just make this sort of an everyday kind of room that I might imagine in my house. I'm looking, and I would do my studio, but it is so cluttered with things that that would be probably a much more complicated interior than you need. So I'm just going to put a basic rectangle. That first shape that I put down equals the wall that I would be looking at. If I'm standing in a room and I'm looking across that room, whatever it is that is the wall facing me, that's that shape I've put in place. So I have a pretty big room. So I'm looking at this and going, okay, if this is my eye level, this is a pretty tall space. So I've already said this is going to be there's a room that has like 12-foot ceilings. So that makes it pretty big. I'm going to go from my vanishing point to each of the corners of my room. You can make the line very lightly if you need to, but you really need the line from the corner projecting out. So I'm going to go to that single vanishing point again, and I'm making lines very lightly, but I really know I need it from the corner projecting out. So I'm going to complete each of these 4 corners with that same thing. I'm laying the ruler on that vanishing point. I know that my line comes down, and I need it from the corner projecting towards me. Same thing. So now you can actually see floor, back wall, ceiling, left wall, right wall. So I'm going to begin looking at those things that are in my room. You can already see that with perspective, as we've been practicing, you do a lot of erasing. I'm going to leave as many lines visible until it starts getting confusing, just because it helps you to realize where I'm finding things. So in an average kind of room that you would be drawing, I'm going to put a window on that back wall. So for a window on the back wall, and I'm going to just sort of choose to center this window. And it just happens that since my ruler has this easy width, I'm just laying the ruler against the side. Anything on the back wall is simply parallel to the back wall. And I'm literally centering it, and I'm using the thickness of the ruler even to help me. So I'll take the top and I'll make that a little, I didn't use the width of the ruler for that distance. So now I've got this, I'm going to just take those bottom where I overdrew the corner. So there would be my window in the back, meaning I'm looking through this into whatever might be outside. So now I'm going to just lighten some of these guidelines. So I went through that horizon line in the wall because I wouldn't be able to see through the wall. when I went through those guidelines, I allowed to show up from each of the corners from that original vanishing point. So there is a window. Now I've started to build a room. Let's imagine that this is a sort of, let's say it's your TV room or a room where you just have some furniture. So I won't necessarily make this a bedroom. What's something you might find in a room like that? So let's put some kind of a shelf over on that left wall. I'm going along my bottom corner, and all I did was made 2 dots. That's where the back of that particular shelf that I want to draw would sit. Remember, in 1-point perspective, everything is a shape. So that's the bottom corner, which means if I draw a line straight out, and then I draw a line parallel to the corner of that back wall I started, I draw a line straight up and move over from where I decided that bottom edge was stopping. I draw another line straight up. I come up here. I draw a line straight across. And that would be where this shelf is going to come out from that wall. And then I take, because with 1-point perspective, you go from your shape, you go back towards the single vanishing point. So and I know because I started by saying there was the dot for the corner of that bookcase was going to touch the wall. Back here's another dot where I said the other back corner is going to be, so I'm going to go to that one. Project a line parallel to this front, so a parallel horizontal. I'm going to bring that line from this corner point straight up, so parallel to the front edge. This parallel. I'm going to go back to that back corner point that I had started with. I'll draw that other side of what would be the rectangle of this shape. I'm going to go to my front. I'm going to very lightly draw that line, back towards my vanishing point. I notice that they intersect right here. If I hit this pretty well, that should be a parallel horizontal. So now what I'm going to do is some erasing, because this is probably starting to become a little bit confusing. So if that's a bookcase, it's solid, which means I can't see through it. So I'm going to get rid of some of these lines. And then I'm going to darken that bookcase to show you how I got to that point. So I'm getting rid of, I'm not completely eliminating them so that I could still find them to help describe how I got there. So I've got a 3B in my hand. If you'd been working with a 2H, you might pick up a darker pencil if you want to locate where some of these specific edges that you want. So now I know that's the front of the bookcase that would be visible. Here's that back edge where it's pushed up against the wall. Here's the bottom. There's that top. You see where it projects back. So there's where the top of it is going back towards the back wall of the room, and here's where the bottom is moving back away from us towards that back. So now, if I wanted this, let's say this was going to be a case that held a big, you have your TV in here and you've got a bunch of other stuff, I could find the middle point. To make it really easy, you don't have to measure in any parallelogram. Probably remember this from math or geometry classes. If I lightly bisect, I just draw a very, very pale line. A lot of times I won't even go the whole corner because I know I'm just looking for where they intersect. There's my middle point, right there. And I can use that. If I hold my ruler against that, that means there's the middle point where it touches here. If I use that point and go back towards my vanishing point, I've just put a middle shelf in that space. If I go back where it touched that last wall and just go straight across. And if I want to give it thickness so this seems more believable now, we could give all of this thickness actually. That way it seems more like you'd imagine a shelf. I'm just going to come up on the front here, and all I'm doing is just drawing a parallel line just because I realize I should have thickness, makes this more believable. So all I'm doing is just putting a double line the whole way around this and back to that towards that vanishing point. The reason I'm doing that is just so this seems like there's some thickness to whatever this shelf would be made of. So now can you see where that is looking much more like a bookshelf now? I'm going to go in and erase some more. Some of those guidelines that might be seeming confusing. Let's imagine that you've got your TV sitting up here. So I could just draw that one side of that screen. Let's again take it the whole way back towards my vanishing point. Take the bottom towards my vanishing point. Cut the edge off over here close to where that other side of my bookcase is. I could just give that some, I could just lightly draw a sort of angled line. So that would indicate that there's some kind of a monitor or a screen sitting in there. If you wanted to put, I could suggest books down here. So for example, I could just do a couple lines. So first thing I'm going to do is just put a bunch of lines. Then I'm going to go up to that, my vanishing point, and I'm going to draw there, and then I'm going to come to those other ones I drew. I'll just make it a little bit different size. So this looks like some big books next to some smaller books. And I'm going to come to the one on the bottom so it's as though I can see a corner. Draw in. Draw in there. Come up to this one, draw in. So if I wanted just to do something like that, I can suggest that there's a variety of books in there. And these kind of details you can figure out how to work out. So if that was a whole bunch of different books. So for now I'm going to leave it at that. So again, I could erase out some of those original guidelines I was using. If I want to put a rug on the floor, I could say the rug is right there at the edge of that. And let's say I want it to come over to there. All I have to do is draw a straight line. The rug is flat, so that would be that narrow, almost like a two-line rectangle if you imagine starting with a shape for the thickness of the rug. And then I'm going to just go from that edge. I'm using that vanishing point again. I'm projecting away from that space. You can determine where you want to end that rug by simply putting another parallel horizontal line. And you can see now how we're starting to get a room. It's got a window, it's got some kind of bookcase with a monitor, it's got a rug laying on the floor. I'm going to do one more item and then I'm going to pause, because we're going to be doing these examples in class. I want to use this single one to just show how I basically set up that space. So I'm going to put something on the floor, because usually there's a piece of upholstery. So I'm going to put a different vanishing point over here. I'm going to put a, let's imagine we have like a sofa or a love seat or something. So I'm going to just come down to this I want it to be parallel because it's sitting there. I'm going to just draw a close to a square. And then I'm going to bring it, I'll just let it be the top edge. So I'll let it actually just end at that line I have. So that would be the end of a sofa facing me, and since I'm working this one in all one point, I could project from each corner of that back to my vanishing point. Once again, you're making these lines really lightly. I'm using a much darker pencil because I want this to be more easily visible. I'm going to come back here and just choose a point where I cut the edge of this sofa or love seat off. Come where that intersects and do another parallel horizontal to the front. I'm going to erase all the lines that wouldn't be visible inside of it because it's starting to get a little bit confusing if I let all of those lines visible. So this big shape, imagine it's the box that the object would come in. We're going to make this into a sofa. So I'm going to use that little trick again where I know if I bisect any space I can find a center point. So if I imagine that's where the cushions are, then the arm might be here. And I'm going to soften this. So all I did was I went slightly above that center point I found. I'm going to make two lines for where that kind of an arm of a sofa might roll. I'm going to come here, and just because I don't want everything in this thing to feel angular, I made that a little more curved because I want to cut a sofa kind of shape out of this. So I could imagine if it has a leg, I'm going to draw another parallel line for where the bottom of the upholstery would end, and then just put that leg down there. If I had a curve here, I'm going to take a curve and just bring it up a little bit larger. I'm going to go from this point I made right there. Now I'm inside of that box I started with, so I'm going to keep following, taking everything back towards that vanishing point. I'm going to just try to take my hand on that curve. I'm going to try to create that curve again. Go from the top of this one. So I'm just going to draw that straight back till it hits that curve. And I'm just making this up. So this sofa I've just literally made up. And I can imagine that, let's say that's the end of it that's facing me. So there's the top of that curve. I go back to that vanishing point again. Bring it here. Now I can start erasing that box that the sofa was delivered in, because I used that to help find the parts, but I won't need all of it now. So that leg you can see on that side. Let's say that the cushion, if the cushion started there, do I see? Yes, I do see some of it. So I could just lightly bring a line across. If that's the top of this, so right there's the top of this arm on the sofa closest to us, so I know that means it's going to be over here. I could do that little thing if I wanted. Just found that midpoint and moved it up. So, boom. Some of this I'm slightly guessing now, but if that would be that sofa edge over there, and this would be cushion, and I can even make that cushion a little bit more curved. I'm going to get rid of that big box that was holding this. And I see that corner and the edge of the rug is still visible here. The edge of the room is still visible there. I can lighten or erase all those guidelines I used to build that sofa. Once again, now that room is becoming pretty believable. It's got multiple objects in it. I'm going to just put something over on this wall, only because I want to show you how you would do a shape on either of these two walls. So let's say I'm going to put some, I'll put like a painting that's hanging. So I'm just going to make a line, a single line. I'm going to go to my vanishing point. I'm going to project from the top of that line. I'm going to project from the bottom of the line. Everything on the side walls, the floor, or the ceiling starts with a single line, and then you project from the vanishing point. So if I did that and then I have the two verticals are parallel, I could imagine that this is a painting. It could have been a window. It could have been any number of things. So there's at least a starting point. And then we're going to talk about using the marker, and then you have the options. After you've inked with a black marker, you can either use colored pencil or you can use charcoal. But I wanted to get to this basic, using one point and putting some objects in it as a starting point for you to practice.